The following is RealAgriculture.com's coverage of CropSphere 2014 in Saskatoon.
I'm Lyndsey Smith with RealAgriculture.com. I'm joined by Drew Lerner with World Weather Inc. based in Kansas City. Drew, there are fewer things farmers like to talk about more than the weather. So you are a very popular man at these events. We're here at CropSphere, the first one. I wanted to touch on a few things, lots of questions about the seeding season and what it's going to be like. And you're saying that we're headed maybe into a drier bias. Maybe. So what's that about?
You know, first of all, meteorologists, you can't trust them, right? So we don't know what we're talking about. So that's the most important thing. But if we look at statistics, what I think will happen is that we're going to have a good seeding season, mainly because there's not going to be a lot of precipitation in the late spring and early summer, or late winter, early spring. The seeding season will actually be a little bit cold in the eastern part of the prairie. So Manitoba, southeastern part of Saskatchewan probably will not do real well with warming up very quickly, but we'll still be able to get in the fields fairly quickly because it looks like there's going to be not so much precipitation. The storms are going to be somewhat weaker, maybe not so intense. So we should be able to get in the fields. Unlike, you know, in these past years in the southeastern and east central part of Saskatchewan where we've been underwater for weeks at a time, that won't happen this year.
Yeah, I was actually sitting with a few farmers, and when you started talking bias, a dry bias, they were actually a little excited because in dry years they do better. So
absolutely.
No, but you did bring up a couple of important points for the Alberta farmers out there, that the snow cover, if we're going to get some late winter warm-ups, we might be losing a lot of that snow cover, and that might be moisture they're going to need.
Yes, exactly. We've got a drier bias under the ground, under the soil, that's been going on since since 2007. And that drier bias is a concern as long as we don't have moisture that's going to come into the soil, either from precipitation or from melting snow. So my concern is we have a lot of snow on the ground in Alberta, in some of the southwestern areas, really from Edmonton down to Red Deer and all the way up to Beaver Lodge and over to the Peace River area. That whole region has got just tons and tons of snow. If we keep that on the ground until we get to the seeding season, then they're going to end up maybe a little too wet and they'll have a problem. But the weather pattern is suggesting that we're going to end up with a warmer and a drier bias in the second half of winter. The warmth is most important because we're probably going to melt some snow, and we could melt a lot of the snow before we even get to the spring, and then it'll all be runoff, and then the moisture that's available for seeding may not be all that great. But I don't want you to interpret that as being a problem for them in the start of the growing season. But a little bit later on, when we get into the late spring, early summer, when these crops start developing and evaporation rates become higher because we're warming up seasonally, we could end up with a moisture deficit, and that's what I'm worried about, is that maybe the middle to latter part of the season may be a little dry, and we may end up hurting a little yield potential then. Okay,
and now I am from the eastern prairies. I am from the Winnipeg area, which doesn't look so great, but I'll forgive you for that. But El Nino, all those, are we in any of these patterns to speak of, or no? Because that's bad news for me in the eastern prairies when they happen.
There's no El Nino and there's no La Nina today.
Okay, today.
There's computer forecasts out there that say that El Nino is going to develop as we get into late April, May, June. I'm not necessarily buying into that yet. I think it's going to come a little bit later, but I do think that it might come. For most of the prairies, I don't think that will be a big issue to start with. When we get a little later down the road, into the autumn and winter of 2014-15, then it might be an issue. And especially if we dry out Alberta and western part of Saskatchewan over this growing season, because El Nino during the winter months will reduce precipitation in all the western prairies and also cause a warmer bias for winter. So we would go into 2015 with even less moisture, and that might be much more of an issue than 2014. I really think we'll do okay in 2014. It's just not going to be 2013.
Okay, I hope so. Okay, well, thank you so much, Drew.
Thank you.